Hell yeah, I'm still talking about PS1 games. This time I want to shed a bit of light on an arcade-style cult classic, one that's rarely brought up and even rarely appraised when it do. Ghost in the Shell gets the mood just right from its first impression. You have a high-budget anime intro by Production IG with lots of crazy Fuchikoma action and sexy pans set to a hard-hitting trance beat. Afterwards, you dive into a very low-key yet stylish spherical menu with lots of green text and cool bleeps and bloops. I wouldn't be surprised if this ever influenced the PS1 lane game. This little opening sets a stage of what to expect. A frenetic anime action shooter with a sleek and meticulous presentation that looks and plays like no other. You have the option to start off with a training mode, learning the controls as you run a gauntlet of target practice courses. I'd recommend starting here, as it really does take some time to get used to the movement and camera. It gets plays like any other console FPS at the time, where you use the D-pad as tank controls and shoulders to strafe. It's harder to get used to, however. Not only can you hold both to boost yourself either backwards or forwards, but you can also jump and climb on any surface you see. This is where the camera turns into the biggest cunt you'll face, as it'll constantly snap to surfaces and zoom in when your back's against the wall. You'll be in a lot of close quarters levels where shit will be snapping in every frame and it's always disorienting. Once you finish your training, you'll get graded on how good you did and get rewarded with a POV cutscene of Kusanagi grilling you. Get a low grade and she'll dismiss you like you're nothing. Get the highest grade and she won't even acknowledge you. Very accurate to the source material. Said source material being the original manga, more so than the more well-known movie. The general tone is a lot more casual, expressive, and void of any somber, high-concept existentialism, which is better IMO. Don't know how you can pull it off in a game where you massacre an entire terrorist cell while jet skiing and falling off buildings. The game really has a big variety of locales and objectives with each stage. You'll mainly be raiding bases, chasing a target, or disarming bombs that could wipe out an entire city by shooting at them until they explode. These are always capped off with a big boss fight that can unfortunately be cheesed the exact same way by circle strafing and using homing missiles. I'm not kidding, it works every time. Majority of the environments are industrial in nature, but they still have a look and feel to them that's unique to the franchise. Each level is segmented by more IG FMVs with some classic sounding dubbing.
Sorry! I heard about explosives training.
Yeah, the whole group spent the night trapped in a restroom.
Poor babies.
Corny as it sounds, there's a lot of care put into the animation, with more than half of the game being taken up by the cutscenes and even more hidden behind alternate outcomes. A lot of money was put into making them, and there's even a half-hour doc just on the making of them alone. So it's a real shame that they look like utter dog shit when compressed onto a PS1 disc. Regardless, they really did the best they could with the limitations on hand. The best result by far out of all of this is just how fucking ace the soundtrack is for being mostly sequenced. It's defo used in its favor, as it's nothing but hard European trance, house, and techno tracks. Even got some big name artists on board to compose. Going off the list, you have tracks like Firecracker that have a slow and steady build up to a mesmerizing loop of percussion and samples cutting in and out. Same can be said for the way Spook and Spell builds up from a stylish bass line to an almost spiritually enlightened mix of Eastern melodies, backed by an even stronger beat. Blinding Waves is a lot more minimalistic compared to any other tracks, but fuck if it's not good for putting you in a hypnotic state of flow, with a constant tick and beat and short loop bass line steered by nothing but convoluted noise. The moments where it drops out and comes back harder sends an indescribable chill down my spine. The one everyone's likely to know is the main Fuchikoma track, and for a good reason. It lures you in with a quick trance beat before the bass drops out of nowhere and leaves the rest of the track as more beats pile on top until breaking down with another louder cut. The track's fighting in a constant back and forth, as beats drop in and out, always catching you off guard. I think every track in this game's OST is noteworthy, even all the experimental shit like Thanatone. Moon River. Can you dig it? Download it. It's all really good shit, especially if you're a fan of experimental EDM from this period. Going back to the gameplay, while I love how fast-paced and open-ended a lot of these levels are designed, there's a big oversight in where you can just run through everything without ever firing a single shot. Like, I'm serious, you can breeze through an entire room full of mines and come out the other end like nothing. I think it honestly would have been better off to just take a page from the tutorial where you have to blow up a certain number of enemies to move on to the next room. I don't think anyone would be annoyed by it or think shit's padded out, cause I mean, you can try killing every enemy you come across and you'll still finish a stage in less than 2 minutes. That's another thing, the game's runtime is super short and there's nothing extra to do unless you want to speedrun it on Twitch. There's honestly a lot of rough edges you have to compromise with. I've already mentioned how bad the camera is for movement, so imagine having to platform on catwalks and steel beams you barely have any room to land on. These aren't a big hurdle up until the last stage where you have to cross from one building to another by carefully timing your jumps Torque style. Those fucking devs, they must have known. If any of this ever feels familiar, this was also made by the same team as Jumping Flash, which can also explain how the frame rate of this game is always on cap despite it running at a buttery smooth 20 FPS. That's if you're lucky. There's a good workaround to this, however, thanks to the modern miracle of Cuck Station, letting you do a simple overclock among other things to improve the look and feel to it. With all that being said, I still think this game deserves a lot more praise and recognition for all it managed to do, regardless of the soundtrack being that fucking good. Besides, you can't really bash on it when it doesn't ever pretend to be anything greater than an arcade-style shooter, trying to push the hardware's boundaries to its limits with small elements of experimentation. Its gameplay, while simple and stiff, still attempts something ambitious with gravity-shifting movement and platforming thrown into tight combat arenas with lots of enemies and explosions on screen. It does a solid attempt at something never before seen while also faithfully adapting the manga's characters and scenarios into something that looks, sounds, and feels like Ghost in the Shell. It ain't perfect, but it's still tight and fun enough for me to give it an easy recommendation to anyone interested in the IP, classic action games, or bedroom SoundCloud producers looking for a good sample.